Welcome to Thoughts Matter. Joining me today is Angeline Simonovich.
Good job.
Is that how you say your name?
Yeah.
Perfect. Angeline is a coworker of mine, and I'm really glad to have her on the show. Angeline, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me. I feel so honored.
So, Angeline, we wanted to talk about the Postulate Challenge. This is, for anyone who hasn't seen it, this is a video I put out a few weeks ago. And the idea is that it's important to know what we believe at our first principle level. You know, what are our core beliefs? And so the Postulate Challenge is more or less a systematic way of getting to those core beliefs. And so I thought it'd be fun to have Angeline on and maybe kind of walk through that process of getting down to our core beliefs, starting with our conclusions, working to our assumptions. Okay, so Angeline, do you have any particular conclusions you want to start with that we can maybe work our way back?
Yeah, I do. So I thought about this. I think the first one's going to be very controversial, but I'll still throw it out there anyway. And we can try to dig deep into like what my assumptions are based on this conclusion. So does that work?
Let's go for it. Yeah, okay. Let's do it.
So I'm taking a note from an example or idea you threw out in your Postulate Challenge video. And I'm going to talk about abortion.
Okay.
And my conclusion is that the right to abortion is necessary.
Okay.
That's
okay.
Why? That's the high level. And now I have some thoughts written down in terms of why. So I think at the end of the day, human beings are flawed and we make mistakes and we're irrational at times. So we come from different backgrounds, which is what dictates how irrational we can be. I don't think you can kind of standardize and then at the end of the day, I think that when people are forced to have something, a life that they don't want to take care of, that life is going to be punished for it. And I think it's better to not have somebody go through that life that's not, happy or ideal. Versus throwing them out there and having them struggle with the struggles that they go through. So that's all I have in terms of my my assumption. But I'd like you could please challenge me because I'm trying to figure out what my thoughts are on this too.
Yeah. So okay. And this is not a debate, so I don't want to make it that. So if it starts to feel ever like that, because I have a different stance. I don't. And we haven't talked about this, but I definitely am more a pro-life person. But the obviously the purpose of this is to get to your assumptions. Okay, so of what you said, so do you believe that it is what do you believe about I guess how do you feel about the fact that abortion is taking a life? Do you believe that it is taking a life?
I think it depends on the duration of the pregnancy before you can actually think it takes a life. I think within the first 3 months, I don't think that you're taking a life. I mean, here's the thing. At the end of the day, it's taking a life. I get that. But when a life has not been born and it has not seen the world, I don't see it as murder per se.
Okay.
So yes, I see what you're saying in it taking a life, but it's a very different taking a life than somebody murdering me at 3 years old.
So why is it different? What determines whether it's murder or not? I guess is murder. What part of murder is different than what aspect makes it murder once they're out of the womb, not murder once they're in the womb? I guess I'm just trying to think of what's the difference.
It's good. Well, again, this all could be incorrect, right? So I don't have the stats behind this or the anecdotes, but when you're in the womb, like for me, I have zero recollection of being in the womb, right?
Sure.
So I was conscious when I was in my mother's womb. And I think there needs to be some sort of consciousness that you're killing in order for it to be considered murder. Versus like when you're in the womb, you're developing. You don't have anything fully developed when the abortion happens or the murder happens. So that's why I don't see it the same. Does that answer?
Sure.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, and I've certainly heard that before. You're definitely not the first person to say that. And again, stop me if this starts to sound like a debate.
No.
Really, I'm just trying to understand. But I guess the question that I would often ask there is, does that same principle apply towards end of life? You know, when someone is no longer conscious, but they're still very much alive. When is it okay to pull the plug? And is consciousness the only aspect of life that is worth noting? You know, is it no longer murder when someone is not conscious or not able to be conscious?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Again, and this is all opinion, right? So my stance is when there is no consciousness and you're a vegetable, there's no reason to keep that person alive.
Okay.
At that point, it's just selfish of your loved ones or your family to do that. And I know this is a very, very sensitive topic, but
Sure.
I do think that you can qualify murdering a life to business or the existence that you are eliminating.
Okay, and I guess to make this so your standard of life, basically in the sense of life worth living, whether it's a life or not, in the biological sense, but life in the sense of is it murder or not, is consciousness. It sounds like that would be your fundamental assumption. But I guess one more question just to clarify, because in the case of a fetus or whatever, a baby that's unborn, that has a potential to be conscious. What about an adult who is gone into a state of unconsciousness, like a long coma, like a 3-year coma, but the doctors are saying there's still a chance that we could bring that person back? You know, there's still that potential of life. Like, I understand, like, the argument of, well, if they're the vegetable and there's no chance of bringing them back, then at some point you got to pull the plug. I get that, and it's a hard decision, but that's not really analogous to the baby.
Right.
Because there's definitely that potential of consciousness. There's the potential of life, even in the sense that you're describing, of consciousness and being or whatever that is. So would the same principle apply? If someone was in a long coma and there was certainly a chance that they could come back, would it still be okay to pull the plug then?
An interesting question. I would say...
Do you agree with me that that's more analogous to the fetus argument?
No.
Okay.
Because more often than not, the person in the coma has had a life before going into the coma. So there's loved ones that they're leaving behind. There are a lot of people relying on this person, and the person also knows their wife, their child, or whoever it is. So it's a huge loss if you're in a coma and there's a chance for you to come back into consciousness and snap out of that coma. It's very different than this fetus or this baby that's being developed in a woman's body or in a woman's who does not want it or is not ready to take care of it. You are eliminating the possibility of a really, really hard life for this human by giving them that opportunity to get rid of it. And again, it's a very sensitive topic, and I don't want to seem like a very cold-hearted person. I know people that have, been put up for adoption when they were really young, and it really impacts them, and not in a very positive way. So in my mind, if you can eliminate that with really, there aren't a lot of negative repercussions to abortion versus you kill somebody that's alive, someone's in a coma, and you say, never mind, we don't want to help them come back out of there. Versus an unborn baby that could potentially have a very tough and difficult life.
There aren't any known negative ramifications. I mean, obviously you're losing potential, so someone that was aborted could be the person that solves cancer or whatever, but I understand what you're saying, where there's none, there aren't any identifiable negative consequences if you, I guess, extinguish a life that hasn't yet been born versus someone who has. So I think I understand what you're saying. Okay, so it sounds like the difference that you're making there, just so we're clear, is that because if the being has never experienced consciousness, then it's a different standard than for someone who has experienced consciousness. Okay. So I don't think there's any more depth that we would need to go. And I could be wrong here, but I think that's pretty much a basic assumption about life. You know, what defines life? Well, it's defined by this experience of consciousness. And if you've had that experience, then that is different than if you've just never had it. That would be like having never been born in the first place.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, I disagree with you, but this is the point where if I was going to try to have a debate with you, a constructive debate, I would then target the assumption that life is consciousness, because I have a different standard of life. And we don't even need to have that discussion. But if we were going to, that would be a very productive discussion, because at this point, I would try to convince you to adopt a different standard. You know, I have a different standard of where life begins. And I would try to show you that your standard is wrong for whatever reason, and I would probably use statistics, anecdotes, all those things. But those things don't make sense if we are talking at the abortion is murder, abortion is necessary, or abortion it has no negative ramification. If we're just talking at like that level of it's fine or it's murder, like those are two extremes that aren't productive. But if we get down to this point where it's like, how do you define life, which I think is the ultimate question in the abortion discussion, then we can actually have a productive discussion. We are discussing these two different opposing standards of life. Mine being, I think the only standard that is in the end completely consistent. And again, this is where we would have that discussion if we were going to go into the debate, is at conception, which is a lot earlier than a lot of people want to put it. A lot of people put it more at like when the heartbeat or when the brain is fully developed or whatever. They have different stages. I would argue that the only one that is totally consistent is conception, because viability changes constantly. This is, I guess, just more the statistics, scientific side of why I believe this, but I think that the viability, as technology progresses, viability becomes earlier and earlier, and so if viability is your standard, which is different from consciousness, but viability being like it could survive outside the womb, a lot of people use that that's why they say 3 months versus 6 months versus 9 months, because it's viable at this point. But that changes with technology, and so it's a life born in a country where it wouldn't survive outside the womb because their technology is not good enough, versus a life in an area where it could survive outside the womb because the technology is better. Is one life not a life and one is? So those are some of the anecdotes or the stats that I would bring to that table, trying to get you to change your standard. Right. But that's a productive discussion versus what a lot of these abortion discussions, because this is an extremely emotional topic, but very rarely does anything productive come out of it, because you get the abortion is murder, abortion is totally fine, or even a necessary evil or whatever. It's like you get two very different conversation, or two different sides that really can't engage in productive conversation. So do you agree with that?
Yes, I agree. Actually, this has really helped me to also, like, I never knew I can drill down this much, and it's been helpful to talk it out like this. I almost want to just like think about what other things like have a stance on, and like do that with you, because it's helpful. It's helpful to ask because you actually know what you believe. So I like it.